Ethan Cole, a man who had survived the deserts of Iraq, carried the silence of war wherever he went. Seeking peace, he built a quiet life in a forgotten Michigan town, where the only sounds were turning wrenches and the slow healing of a soul once torn by combat. His only companion was Rex, a German shepherd whose loyalty had been forged in the same fire. Together, they fixed what others abandoned: engines, memories, sometimes themselves. But one frozen morning, while restoring an old BMW salvaged from a junkyard, Rex began to growl. A low, uneasy sound Ethan hadn't heard since the battlefield. When he pried open the seat, a hidden bundle surfaced. Worn leather, dust, and a name that would draw him into another soldier's unfinished story. A story of guilt, redemption, and the quiet grace that still moves through broken lives. Please support us by subscribing to the channel to follow this emotional journey. Morning fog drifted low across the outskirts of Traverse City, Michigan, soft and silver over the fields where frost still clung to the grass. The old two-lane highway curved past barns and pine groves before reaching a squat metal building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Cole's Auto and Repair." Inside, the air smelled of oil, sawdust, and the faint sweetness of gasoline. Ethan Cole, 45, stood over an open engine, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Years of military work had carved his frame into sturdy lines. His short brown hair had gone salt and pepper at the temples, and fine scars crossed his forearms like pale threads. His gray-green eyes were steady but distant, the kind of eyes that had learned to scan horizons long before they learned to rest. A battered radio hummed on a shelf. Near the door lay Rex, his 8-year-old German shepherd. The dog's sable coat gleamed bronze under the morning light, one ear permanently bent from a fragment wound years ago. He was alert even in rest, head on his paws, watching Ethan as if guarding him from memories rather than intruders. Ethan finished tightening a bolt, leaned back, and listened to the quiet. After 2 tours overseas, quiet still felt like a luxury he didn't quite deserve. Fixing engines was the only thing that made sense anymore. Machines broke for clear reasons, people didn't. A knock sounded. The screen door creaked open, and Sarah Donnelly, the postwoman, stepped inside, brushing drizzle from her cap. She was tall and thin, mid-30s, auburn hair escaping from under her hat. Her freckled face always carried the same easy half-smile, as if she knew every secret in town but would never tell. "Mornin', Ethan," she said, holding a small stack of envelopes. Bills, catalogs, and one letter from the veterans office. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. "My favorite kind of mail," Sarah grinned. "Could be worse. I once delivered a box of worms someone ordered online. The post truck smelled like a swamp for a week." Rex padded over, tail wagging. Sarah crouched, rubbing behind his ear. "Hey there, Sergeant Rex, still keeping him in line?" Rex huffed, and Ethan smiled faintly. Better than the Army ever did. After she left, the garage fell back into its usual hush. Ethan opened the veteran's letter, glanced at the words therapy program, and set it aside. Some ghosts didn't like company. Later that afternoon, a familiar rumble approached. A rusty tow truck stopped outside, and Frank Miller, the junkyard owner, climbed out. Frank was in his 60s, thick-set, with a belly that preceded him by half a step, gray beard bristling like steel wool. His laugh always came before his words. "Cole, got something you might like," he called, slamming the truck door. "A fella never showed to claim this beauty." Ethan stepped outside, On the flatbed sat a BMW M5 1991 model, once sleek and black, now dulled by grime, windshield cracked, one tier flat. "She's been sitting in the yard near the old grain silos," Frank said. "Owner disappeared. Got the paperwork, salvage title and all. Figured you'd appreciate German craftsmanship more than the scrap crusher." He winked. Ethan walked a slow circle around the car, fingertips grazing the metal. Despite the rust, the shape was proud, balanced, defiant, as if refusing to surrender to time. "How much?" Frank rubbed his beard. "She's been collecting dust for 10 years. Let's say 500. Ethan squinted. 4, and you throw in delivery." Frank barked a laugh. "You drive a hard bargain, soldier. Deal." They shook hands, grease-rough palms sealing it. By dusk, the car stood inside Ethan's garage, water dripping from the undercarriage where the melted snow had clung. He signed the receipt Frank left behind, a small but important legal note that made the purchase clean, and watched the tow truck's taillights disappear down the road. Rex circled the car once, sniffing the tires, then looked up at Ethan as if asking whether this new arrival was friend or foe. Ethan crouched, scratching the dog's neck. "What do you think? Worth saving?" Rex gave a low woof, decisive. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "Me too." He ran a hand over the hood. Beneath the grime, he could feel the cold, solid heartbeat of craftsmanship. Maybe, like him, it had seen better days. Maybe it just needed patience. The wind rose outside, rattling the loose metal of the roof. Ethan pulled the door shut, switched on the overhead lamp, and stood for a long moment watching the car gleam under the yellow light. For reasons he couldn't name, the sight stirred something, a sense of recognition, of unfinished purpose. He fetched a notebook and scribbled a few notes about parts he'd need: spark plugs, brake pads, new seat upholstery. The list looked manageable, almost comforting. Fixing something broken meant there was still order left in the world. Rex settled near the door, eyelids drooping. Ethan took one last look at the BMW, its reflection faintly mirrored on the polished concrete floor. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the smell of oil and rain, a flicker of warmth returned, like the first light at dawn after a long deployment night. He switched off the lamp, leaving only the faint gleam of chrome in the dark. "Tomorrow, buddy," he said to Rex. "We start fresh." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, deliberate, quiet as forgiveness. Dawn pried a thin blade of light under the garage door and laid it across the BMW's hood like a promise. Ethan brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon, scratched Rex between the ears, and rolled his tool cart to the driver's side. The air held the crisp bite of lake weather, metal cool and clean. Today wasn't about miracles, it was about bolts, patience, and listening to old steel tell the truth. He started with the easy victories. Floor mats out, brittle plastic clips teased free, center console loosened without cracking it. Years of pocket grit and a single nickel clinking into a tray. Under the dash, he found a brittle service tag from 2001 and a fuse that had been replaced with a sliver of aluminum foil. Someone's roadside prayer. He smiled, the kind that barely bent his lips. Machines broke for reasons. Reasons could be fixed. By mid-morning, he was inside the doors, cleaning window tracks, logging part numbers in his notebook, methodical as a field checklist. He saved the rear bench for last. On paper, it was simple. 2 latch points, lift, and it should pop. But when he leaned a knee in and pulled, the cushion gave him nothing, not a millimeter. He verified what the service manual would have said. Latches free, anchor bolts loosened, hinge points clear. It still sat there like a stubborn memory. Rex padded over, ears pricked, sniffing the seam where the cushion met the pan. The dog's breath fogged the leather. His posture changed. The quiet, intent focus Ethan had learned to trust more than any torque spec. "You smell something I don't, partner," Ethan murmured. He slid a flat trim bar under the leading edge and felt resistance that didn't read like metal on metal. It was tackier, fibrous, adhesive that had petrified or fabric that had fused to the pan. He warmed the seam with a heat gun, careful, waving it in passes until the old glue sighed. Another pry. The seat protested in a long, dry groan, and then, crack, a sound like a knuckle popping after years clenched. Dust lifted, the fine, papery kind that carried a ghost of tobacco and winter road salt. The cushion rose enough for his fingers to slip under. Something waited there. Not the dead thud of soundproofing or the light rattle of coins, but a compact weight with corners. He eased the bench up on a wooden prop, coughing once as stale air uncoiled. Rex stood statue still, tail level, eyes fixed. "All right," Ethan said, voice low, as if a loud word might spook the past. Beneath the bench sat a bundle about the size of a hardback novel, wrapped in dark canvas cut from an old tool apron, edges stitched shut with sun-faded nylon thread. Oil had kissed it in places and dried to amber stains. He could feel a spine through the fabric and the firm plane of enclosures pressed alongside. He carried it to the bench as if it might fracture and laid it under the lamp. He didn't reach for a knife right away. He poured fresh coffee, wiped his hands again on a clean rag he didn't need, and breathed. In the Army, he'd learned the power of moments like this. Pause before you open, look before you touch, decide why before you find out what. He cut the stitches along the shortest seam, lifting each looped knot so the fabric could be closed again if it turned out not to be his to see. Inside, the air changed. Drier, older, a whiff of leather tanned when payphones still worked. He drew out a small leather-bound notebook, its corners rounded by time. 2 black-and-white photographs in a paper sleeve, and a sealed envelope. Ivory gone to butter, the flap unbroken. The notebook fit his palm with the intimacy of a well-used socket. In the lower corner, barely visible, 2 letters had been pressed into the leather. R.H. He thumbed the first page and stopped at the date. April 3rd, 1993. The handwriting was careful, the print of a man who wanted order. "Shop's slow. Emily starts school next week. She wants the big pack of paints. Maybe next month." Ethan found the second breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Not treasure, not contraband, a life. He closed the covers gently and set the book aside without reading further. Whatever was here belonged to someone else. If it needed opening, it should be opened for the right reason, not curiosity in work boots. He turned to the photographs. The first. A man in his late 30s, square-jawed, dark hair slicked back, standing beside a younger BMW that gleamed as if it had a name. He wore a grease-stained shop shirt and the kind of half-grin men keep when they're tired but proud. One hand rested on the hood, the other held a little girl on his hip, 5 or 6, straw-colored hair in a messy ponytail, cheeks round with summer. Chalk dust smudged one of her knees. The second photo was softer, indoor light. The same child at a kitchen table, tongue caught between her teeth as she colored a page crowded with cars and rainbows. A woman's hand, ring on it, slid a plate with apple slices into frame. No faces for the adults, just the work of love. Then the envelope. Across the front, in the same neat hand, to my daughter, Emily. No stamp, no address. He set it down, the weight of its unbroken seal falling heavier than the canvas had felt. He looked at Rex. The dog had moved closer, laying his chin on his paws, eyes lifted toward Ethan. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "This one matters." A rap sounded at the doorframe and jolted the spell without breaking it. A lanky teenager hovered there like a question mark. Tommy Jenkins, 16, all elbows and enthusiasm, freckles scattered across sun-thin skin, a haystack of sandy hair forever needing a comb. He wore a diner logo hoodie glazed with fry grease and the bruised pride of a kid who'd learned to laugh first when people expected him to mess up. "Mr. Cole, Frank said you pulled an M5 out of the yard. Is that true, or is he screwing with me?" "It's true," Ethan said, setting his body slightly between Tommy and the workbench. "You on break or skipping?" "Split shift," Tommy said, straightening. "I wash dishes till 11 and flip at 5. Thought I'd see if you needed an extra pair of hands. No charge. I just want to learn." He looked at the car, reverence softening his edges. "Man, she's beautiful." Ethan weighed the risks. The bundle behind him had changed the room, but the boy's eyes were honestly dazzled by the car, not the secrets of strangers. Ethan nodded toward a bucket. "Start with those bolts, sorting by length, coffee can left, yogurt tub right. Don't mix the 10mm with anything smaller." Tommy grinned and set to work, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth. The universal expression of concentration at Sixton. For an hour, the garage found its music again. Clink of steel, soft radio, the light rasp of sandpaper kissing rust off a bracket. Rex drifted between them, pausing by Ethan often, as if to remind him the envelope still existed. When the small tasks were done, Ethan walked Tommy through a wiring harness diagram, explaining patience like it was torque, steady pressure, no snaps. The boy soaked it up, nodding too much, asking one question too many, earnest to a fault. "What's that?" Tommy finally asked, nodding at the notebook he could just see on the bench. "Something that came with the car," Ethan said. "Belongs to someone else." "Oh." Tommy flushed and looked back to the harness. "Right." Near noon, Tommy packed his hoodie pocket with a handful of rag ends Ethan told him he could keep. "Clean your sockets with those. Grease hides where pride can't." The boy beamed as if he'd been knighted. "Thanks, Mr. Cole. I'll come back after shift if that's cool." "It's cool," Ethan said, and meant it. The garage soughed into silence when the kid left. Ethan locked the door, more habit than fear, and returned to the bench. He opened the notebook again, not to read it all, but to confirm the boundary he would not cross. He skimmed only the first page and the last. The early entry with paints. The final one, inconclusive, dated weeks later, a sentence that ended mid-thought, ink darker as if pressed harder. "If I can't fix what I broke, I'll at least make sure someone knows she." The dash of the pen wandered, then stopped. He closed the book, thumb warm against the leather, and let the ache move through him without asking it to leave. He lifted the envelope, feeling the ridged texture of old stationery. For a heartbeat, he imagined two paths, one where he slit it open now and stole a truth that wasn't his, and another where he carried it to the name on its face and let the words find their rightful reader. He chose the second path and set the letter back in its paper sleeve with the photos, then slid all of it into the canvas wrap he had opened so carefully. He stitched the cut seam closed with black nylon thread from his own kit. Tidy, visible, honest, as if to say opened to protect, closed to respect. He labeled a shallow parts box with masking tape, BMW, personal effects, do not discard, and placed the bundle inside, far from the reach of curiosity and solvents. Rex exhaled a long, warm breath and laid his head against Ethan's boot. "We'll find her," Ethan said to the dog, surprised at the certainty in his own voice. "If there's an Emily still out there, she deserves what her father left." He turned back to the car and made himself do the next right mechanical thing. Pulled the rear bench fully, inspected the pan for rust, documented an old water line that said the car had weathered floods but not drowned. He worked until the afternoon light slanted gold, until his note page for parts had grown a second column. The envelope stayed sealed. The promise stayed simple. When the bell on the door jangled near closing, Sarah Donnelly leaned in again with a small box. "Special delivery," she said, winking. "It rattles. Could be the meaning of life. Could be lug nuts." "I'll take either," Ethan said, signing. She peered at the BMW and offered the gentle smile of a person who recognized rights when she saw them. "Looks like she's telling you her story," Sarah said. "Be kind to it." "That's the plan." After she left, Ethan killed the radio and stood in the near quiet, the kind that isn't empty but attentive. He set both palms on the roof of the BMW and let the cool metal press back against him. "All right, Richard," he said softly, tasting the name for the first time. "I hear you. I'll do this right." Outside, a lake wind moved through the pines, carrying the clean scent of thaw. Inside, the veteran, the shepherd, and the car waited together at the edge of a road that hadn't been driven in 30 years. Ethan turned off the lights, pocketed the keys, and carried the labeled box home like a vow. The night came soft and cold, the kind that quieted everything except the faint hum of streetlights along the road. Ethan sat alone in the garage, a mug of black coffee cooling beside the workbench. The BMW loomed behind him, its shadow steady, its silence heavier now that he knew what lay beneath its seat. The canvas bundle rested in front of him, sealed again, labeled and waiting. He'd promised himself he wouldn't open it again, but promises made in silence were always the hardest to keep. Rex stirred near the door, his ears twitching. The dog's instincts were tuned to moods more than noises, and tonight his tail thumped once before curling back around his paws. Ethan took that as permission. He wasn't reopening the past, he told himself, just confirming what he already knew. He lifted the notebook, turning it carefully in his hands. The initials R.H. gleamed faintly under the lamp's gold light. He skimmed through a few pages, this time reading whole paragraphs. The handwriting was uneven in places, pressed harder when emotions rose. June 11th, 1993. The shop's quiet. Emily helped me paint the sign again. She used too much blue, said it was the color of her favorite crayon. Margaret laughed. I can still hear that laugh when I close the shop door. August 3rd, 1993. Margaret's been coughing again. Doctor says she needs rest. I told her I'd handle the books, but I don't know if I can. Emily's drawings are all cars now, every one of them with wings. Maybe she thinks if they could fly, nothing bad would ever happen on the road. The lines blurred for Ethan as he read. This was no diary. It was a slow unraveling of a man. Each entry grew shorter, more fractured. Then came one that stopped him. November 7th, 1993. Storm warning. Emily wants to go see the river before it floods. I told her no, but she's her mother's child, stubborn and bright. Margaret says I worry too much. Maybe they're right. Maybe tomorrow I'll take them both for a drive to clear the air. That was the last full entry. The one after was dated November 11th, the same day Deputy Harris later said Richard Henley disappeared. If I can't fix what I broke, I'll at least make sure someone knows she... The pen had dragged off the page, leaving a deep gouge in the paper. Ethan closed the book gently, feeling the pulse of sadness through the leather. Somewhere, decades ago, a man had tried to write his way out of guilt and failed. He stared at the BMW. Its silent frame seemed to breathe under the dim light. A relic that had witnessed grief and refused to rot. He couldn't leave it at that. He needed to know what happened to the man, to the family, to the little girl in the photograph. A rap sounded at the door. It was sharp but familiar. When Ethan opened it, Deputy Harris stood there, bundled in a sheriff's parka, his breath fogging in the cold. "Evening, Cole," he said. "Sorry to drop in unannounced. Mind if I step in?" Ethan nodded and gestured him inside. Harris was broad and thick-necked with a face carved from hard years, a man who'd seen too many wrecks and not enough healing. His blonde hair had thinned to a widow's peak, and his uniform smelled faintly of pine from his patrol truck's air freshener. "Frank Miller mentioned you picked up a BMW from his yard," Harris said, brushing snow off his sleeve. "Said it used to belong to a guy named Richard Henley. That ring a bell?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, found his name in a journal that came with the car." Harris frowned, eyes narrowing with cautious curiosity. "That car's got a story. Back in '94, we got a missing person report. Richard Henley, mechanic, lived in Lansing with his wife and kid. His daughter was declared drowned after a flash flood. Couple days later, he drove off and vanished. Folks thought he put the car in the river, but we never found it." Ethan's stomach tightened. "You sure it's the same guy?" "Same VIN. Same registration. Weird thing is, the title never transferred. His wife tried to settle the estate, but with no body, it just sat in legal limbo. Eventually, the bank repossessed the property, the car got towed, and years later, Frank's yard bought it for parts." Harris rubbed his jaw, sighing. "It's one of those stories that sticks in the files like splinters." Ethan stared at the car, the truth slotting into place like rusted gears finding alignment. The man hadn't driven into the river. He'd hidden his grief in steel and silence. Harris eyed him. "You find anything else inside? Anything personal?" Ethan thought of the sealed envelope, the photograph of a little girl with chalk on her knees. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, some family keepsakes. A letter." "You open it?" "No," Ethan said, meeting his gaze. "Didn't feel like mine to read." The deputy's shoulders eased, and something like respect flickered in his expression. "Good man. You thinking of turning them in?" "I'm thinking of finding out if his daughter's still out there." Harris studied him for a long moment. "You think she survived that flood?" "I don't know, but if she did, someone should tell her father didn't just leave." The silence that followed was long but not uncomfortable. Finally, Harris nodded once. "You always were one for finishing what others couldn't. I'll pull what I can from the old database, birth records, missing persons, maybe a next of kin. Give me a day or two." Ethan extended a hand. "Thanks, Harris." "Don't thank me yet," the deputy said, heading for the door. "Stories like this, they rarely end tidy." When the truck's headlights disappeared into the night, Ethan sat back down at his bench. The letter seemed heavier now, the words inside calling across time. He ran a thumb along its sealed edge but resisted the urge to open it. The right eyes had to him read it. Rex whined softly and rested his head on Ethan's boot. "I know," Ethan whispered. "We'll find her. Somehow." He turned off the lights, leaving only the lamp's faint glow on the BMW's hood. In the dimness, the car looked alive again, not a project, but a promise. Morning came gray and heavy with a mist that blurred the tree line beyond the garage. The radio murmured low, lost in static, and the smell of machine oil lingered like old cologne. Ethan stood at the workbench, the sealed envelope and the notebook side by side, staring at them as though the paper itself could breathe. Sleep hadn't come the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the half-finished sentence from Richard Henley's journal. "If I can't fix what I broke, I'll at least make sure someone knows she." He poured black coffee into a chipped mug and took a slow sip, his thoughts running in circles. Richard's life had ended without an answer, but the story didn't have to. The man had been a mechanic, a father, a veteran. Ethan understood the type. Men who buried guilt under work, who tried to repair everything except themselves. Rex brushed against his leg, tail thumping once before sitting down. The dog tilted his head as if to say, "What now?" "What now?" Ethan echoed aloud, voice low, "as we finish what he started." He set the mug aside and opened an old flip phone from the drawer. The screen was cracked at the corner but still worked. He scrolled through contacts until he reached the one name he hadn't called in years, Mike Reynolds. Mike had served with him in Iraq, Logistics Division, the guy who could get you a truck tire in the middle of nowhere or a cold beer when it mattered most. After deployment, Mike had joined the Michigan Department of Motor Vehicles, saying he preferred dealing with machines that didn't shoot back. Ethan pressed call. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered, warm and amused. "Well, I'll be damned. Ethan Cole. I was just telling my wife how quiet life's been lately." "Guess I ruined that," Ethan said with a faint smile. "You always do. What's up, brother?" "I need a favor." There was a pause. "The kind that breaks the law or just bends it?" "Just bends," Ethan said. "I'm trying to find someone. Got a name, Richard Henley. Used to own a 91 BMW M5. I've got the VIN number." Mike whistled. "Going full detective, huh? All right, text me the VIN. I'll run it through the archives, see what pops up. Give me a few hours." "Appreciate it." "Hey," Mike added, tone softening, "whatever this is, you sound different. You okay?" Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, just trying to make something right for once." The line went quiet for a beat. Then Mike said simply, "You always were that guy. I'll call when I got something." Ethan hung up and exhaled slowly. Outside, sleet began to patter against the tin roof, soft and uncertain. He ran his hand through Rex's fur. "Guess we wait." By mid-afternoon, his phone buzzed. The message from Mike read, "Henley, Richard A., registered owner of BMW M5. Last known address, Lansing, Michigan. Vehicle marked inactive since 1994. Property foreclosed in 1996. No next of kin listed. Wife, deceased, 2004. Possible surviving relative, Emily Henley, unverified. Ethan's pulse quickened. He dialed immediately. "Talk to me," Mike said. "I've got to check that address." "Don't bother," Mike replied. "County records say the place was condemned 15 years ago. But I can tell you this, there's a current employment record under the same name. Emily Henley, registered nurse, VA Hospital, Grand Rapids." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "You sure?" "As sure as a bureaucrat can be before lunch. Want me to email the file?" "No," Ethan said. "I'll take it from here." Mike chuckled softly. "Still allergic to paperwork. Be safe, man." "I'll try." When the call ended, Ethan stood still for a long time, the sound of the sleet fading into nothing. He looked at the envelope again, then toward the BMW. "She's out there, Rex," he murmured. "After all this time, she's out there." Rex tilted his head, eyes bright. Ethan grabbed his jacket, the thick Carhartt canvas worn soft from years of grease and rain, and pulled on his gloves. He packed the notebook and the envelope into a small tool case, his version of a safe. Before leaving, he turned off the lights, letting the garage rest in half shadow. The drive to Lansing took 2 hours. The road wound through bare trees and old farms left to silence. When he reached the address, what remained of the Henley house barely stood. A sagging roof, boards nailed across the windows, ivy crawling over the porch, snow piled on the steps like a shroud. He parked across the street. Rex whined from the passenger seat, uneasy. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I feel it too." The door of the neighboring house opened, and a woman stepped out. Mrs. Clara Parker, 77, short and stooped, but with an alert gaze that could have belonged to someone half her age. Her white hair was pinned into a bun, and her wool cardigan hung loose on narrow shoulders. She squinted toward Ethan's truck, suspicion tempered with curiosity. "You lost, mister?" she called, her voice surprisingly strong. Ethan stepped out, raising a hand. "No, ma'am. Just looking for someone. You wouldn't happen to know who used to live next door?" Her face softened. "That was the Henley place. Haven't heard that name in years." She shuffled closer, peering up at him. "You a relative?" "No. I found something that belonged to them." "Well," she sighed, "you won't find them here. Richard and his wife moved after the flood. Well, she did anyway. He disappeared. Poor man. Their little girl, Emily, was all anyone talked about that summer. Sweet kid. Loved to draw cars on the sidewalk. Then one day the storm came and—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "They said she was gone, but you know how rumors go." "Rumors?" Ethan pressed gently. Mrs. Parker nodded. "A few years back, I read something in the paper. Some story about a nurse in Grand Rapids with that same name. Thought it was strange, because that girl would have been about the right age by then." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a fragile, electric hope. "Do you remember which hospital?" She frowned, thinking. "Veterans Hospital, I think. I remember because I thought, well, that's fitting, after what her daddy went through." Ethan nodded, his gratitude quiet, but real. "Thank you, ma'am. You've been more help than you know." The old woman smiled faintly. "If you see her, tell her the lady next door still keeps flowers by the fence. Daisies, her favorite." "I will," he promised. He returned to the truck, Rex watching him expectantly. "Grand Rapids," Ethan said. "Looks like that's where we're heading next." By the time he reached home, the sleet had turned to snow, blanketing the world in soft white. He sat in the truck for a moment before cutting the engine, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. Inside the garage, the BMW waited, silent but somehow less burdened now, as if it knew the story was beginning to find its way home. Ethan placed the envelope back on the bench next to the photograph of Richard and Emily. He rested his hand on the table and spoke softly, almost to himself. "You did your best, Richard. Now it's my turn." Rex gave a low bark, tail sweeping the floor. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, boy. Tomorrow." Snow still clung to the edges of parking lots in Grand Rapids, melting into thin silver veins that fed the gutters. The VA hospital rose out of the mist like a fortress of glass and steel, its windows reflecting the gray sky. Ethan parked his old truck under a crooked lamppost, the engine ticking as it cooled. Beside him, Rex stood alert, watching people come and go through the main doors. Nurses in blue scrubs, veterans in worn coats, the shuffle of wheelchairs and canes echoing faintly. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the old ache in his ribs tighten. He'd faced firefights, convoy ambushes, and sleepless nights and sandstorms, but none of it had ever made his hands tremble like this. He reached across the seat, rubbing Rex's neck. "Stay, partner. I'll be right back." Rex gave a soft grunt, eyes steady, the kind of look that said, "I'll wait as long as it takes." Inside, the hospital air carried that sterile tang of antiseptic and hope, the kind of place where both healing and heartbreak lived side by side. Ethan approached the front desk where a woman in her 50s, Nurse Helen Porter, sat behind a computer. She had the practiced calm of someone who'd seen everything twice: round face, short gray curls, and reading glasses perched on her nose. "Good morning," Ethan said, voice rough from the cold. "I'm looking for someone who works here. Nurse Emily Henley." Helen looked up, studying him briefly. "Are you family?" He hesitated. "Not exactly, but it's important." Something in his tone made her nod slowly. "She's on shift in Ward C, Recovery Wing, Veterans Unit. You can wait in the family lounge, or I can call her." "I'll wait," he said. The lounge was quiet, lined with old magazines and a vending machine that hummed like a tired beehive. Ethan sat near the window, his tool case, the one holding Richard's letter and journal, resting on his lap. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and tentative. When the door opened, he stood. Emily Henley stepped in wearing pale blue scrubs and a name badge clipped to her pocket. She was in her late 30s, her frame slender but strong, the kind of quiet strength that comes from carrying other people's pain for a living. Her hair was a honey blonde shade, tied back loosely, a few strands framing a face both kind and weary. She had gray-blue eyes, the same as the little girl in the photograph, and a small scar above her eyebrow that caught the light when she turned her head. "Hi," she said carefully, voice steady but guarded. "You were asking for me?" Ethan cleared his throat. "Yeah, my name's Ethan Cole. I found something that I think belongs to you, or at least to your family." Her brows knitted. "My family?" He nodded, setting the tool case on the table between them. "I'm a mechanic. I bought an old BMW at a salvage auction outside Traverse City. When I started restoring it, I found a package hidden under the back seat, a notebook, some photos, and this letter." He unlocked the case, lifted the sealed envelope, and placed it gently before her. The handwriting, her father's, unmistakably strong and straight, seemed to pull the air out of the room. Emily's hand went to her mouth, Her eyes widened, then filled with tears that she didn't blink away. This can't be. Ethan spoke softly. The man who owned that car, Richard Henley, he was your father, wasn't he? She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. They told me he died. The police found his wallet near the lake after the storm, said he drove into the water. My mother never recovered. We moved away, and she made me promise to take her maiden name until I was old enough to choose. When she passed, I took his name back. Ethan swallowed. He didn't die in that river. That car survived. He must have hidden these before he disappeared. She picked up the letter but hesitated to open it. Her hands trembled so much she set it down again. I was 9, she whispered. I remember that night. The rain never stopped. Dad told me to stay in the car while he went to check the bridge. Then I saw headlights and nothing. I woke up in a stranger's house. A fisherman found me downstream, half conscious. Mom said we were lucky to be alive. Ethan's chest tightened. He must have thought you were gone. Maybe that's why he left everything behind. The guilt, the loss. It broke him. She looked up at him, eyes swimming. Why you? Why now? Ethan thought for a moment before answering. Maybe because I understand what it's like to come home and not recognize yourself. Maybe because he couldn't find peace, but someone had to. For a long while, she said nothing. Then she reached for the letter again and carefully broke the brittle seal. The sound was small, like paper breathing after decades of silence. She unfolded it, and her father's words filled the air in his shaky, honest script. My dear Emily, if you are reading this, then I couldn't find my way back. I thought I lost you that night, and I lost myself with you. I can't fix what I broke, but maybe one day this car will. I've left our memories inside it, hoping someone kind will bring them home to you. If you ever wonder whether I loved you, know that I never stopped. Emily's tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. She pressed it to her chest, shaking. Ethan stood quietly, his eyes down, giving her the silence she needed. After a moment, she whispered, He wasn't a coward. Everyone said he ran away, that he gave up on us. But he didn't. He tried to make it right in the only way he knew how. Ethan nodded. He did. She looked at him, really looked, and her gaze softened. Thank you for finding me, for bringing him back. He smiled faintly. I think he wanted me to. Sometimes life just needs a messenger. Her laugh came through tears, raw and small. A messenger in grease-stained boots? Best kind there is, Ethan said. They both smiled then, the heavy air between them easing just enough to breathe. Emily refolded the letter, her movements deliberate, reverent. The car, she said. You said you're restoring it? Trying to, he replied. It's rough, but solid underneath, like it's been waiting. Her voice steadied. Then let me help. I'd like to see it again. The last piece of him I still have. Ethan nodded slowly. Then it settled. As they stood, snow drifted past the windows in lazy spirals. For the first time since he'd touched that sealed envelope, Ethan felt something shift. Not just in the story, but in himself. The ghosts were quieter now, their work almost done. When he walked back outside, Rex was waiting by the truck, tail thumping against the seat. Ethan scratched behind his ears. We found her, boy. The dog barked once. Short, sharp, certain. Yeah, Ethan murmured, staring at the hospital lights glowing against the dusk. And now, we start fixing what's left. The first day Emily arrived at Ethan's garage, the air carried the faint scent of thawing snow and motor oil. The world outside was gray, but sunlight spilled through the cracked windows in thin golden lines, lighting up floating dust like ghosts deciding to stay a while. Ethan had cleared space beside the BMW, laying out spare wrenches, polishing cloths, and a second stool that hadn't seen use in years. When Emily's small silver sedan pulled up, Rex raised his head and barked twice, tail sweeping the floor. Ethan smiled faintly. "Looks like she found us, boy." Emily stepped out, dressed in jeans and a dark wool coat. Her blonde hair was tied back, a few strands catching the wind. She carried a thermos and a small paper bag. "Peace offering," she said with a shy grin. "Coffee and muffins. My patients bake better than I do." "You just earned Employee of the Month," Ethan said, taking the cup she offered. The garage was colder than she expected, but warm in another way, alive with the scent of tools, metal, and quiet purpose. Her eyes settled on the BMW, now half restored, chrome polished, doors replaced, primer coat drying smooth. Her hand lifted unconsciously to trace the curve of the car's hood. "It's strange," she murmured, "how something can look both familiar and foreign at the same time." "That's how I feel most mornings," Ethan replied, adjusting his gloves. They started slow. Ethan showed her how to replace the old spark plugs, how to clean the fuel injectors, how to feel for the faintest give in a stubborn bolt before it snapped. Emily watched carefully, her brows furrowed in concentration. She wasn't a natural mechanic, but she had steady hands, the kind that had stitched countless wounds and held fading pulses steady. Rex moved between them, sometimes curling near the workbench, other times padding to the doorway to watch snowmelt drip from the roof. Every so often, Emily knelt to scratch behind his ears. "He's such a good listener," she said once. "Better than most people," Ethan replied. As the days became weeks, the garage took on a rhythm, a quiet heartbeat of scraping wrenches, laughter, and stories. Emily began bringing music, old vinyl jazz records from her mother's collection. On slow afternoons, she'd hum softly while sanding a piece of trim. Ethan found himself humming too, though he pretended not to notice. One evening, after hours of work, Emily sat on the stool wiping grease from her hands. "You know," she said, "when I was little my dad used to talk to the car while he worked. He said it listened better than people did. Mom used to tease him for it." Ethan smiled, tightening a bolt. "Maybe that's why I like cars. They don't argue." She looked at him then, head tilted. "But they also don't tell you when you're wrong." He laughed, a sound so rare it surprised even him. "Fair point." As the BMW neared completion, they hit their first snag, the transmission. It was corroded beyond repair, the gears fused by time. Ethan cursed under his breath, pulling off his gloves. "We'll need a replacement. Not easy to find for a model this old." Emily frowned. "What do we do?" "Frank Miller might still have one in his yard," Ethan said, wiping his hands. "If we're lucky, it's not already stripped." The next morning, they drove to Frank's scrapyard, an endless landscape of metal skeletons glinting under the sun. Frank greeted them with his usual booming laugh. "Cole, and you must be the nurse he's been talking about." Emily blushed. "Talking about me?" Ethan muttered. "He exaggerates." Frank winked. "Not much to exaggerate. Follow me. I think I've got what you need." They spent an hour digging through rows of forgotten cars until they found it, an old transmission covered in dust but intact. Frank sold it cheap, insisting, "For a love story like this, I should charge double." Emily laughed. "It's not," she began, but Ethan cut her off with a dry, "We'll take it." Back at the garage, they worked side by side installing the part. Emily held the light while Ethan guided the bolts in. Their hands brushed once, and neither spoke for a long moment. When the last bolt clicked into place, Ethan turned the key. The engine coughed, stuttered, then roared to life. A low, powerful hum that filled the room like a heartbeat returned. Rex barked excitedly, running circles around them. Emily's eyes filled with tears, shining in the glow of the dashboard lights. "It's alive," she whispered. Ethan nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Told you she just needed someone to believe in her." They stood there for a long while, and the hum of the engine filling the silence that used to belong to loneliness. Emily rested a hand on the hood, her voice barely audible. "He'd be proud, you know." Ethan looked at her, then at the car. "So would your mom." She smiled through tears. "Maybe they're both here, in some way." Rex lay down near the car, tail thumping softly, his eyes closing as if the sound itself was a lullaby. As twilight deepened, the engine idled quietly, steady as a heartbeat. Emily leaned against the fender, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You didn't just fix this car, Ethan. You fixed a part of me I didn't even know was still broken." He looked at her for a moment before replying, "Sometimes fixing things is just an excuse to keep hope alive." For once, the garage didn't feel lonely. It felt like home. Spring crept quietly into Michigan. The ice on the lake near Ethan's garage had broken into slow-moving glass shards that winked beneath the morning light. The air smelled of thawed earth and wet pine. Inside the garage, the BMW sat gleaming, restored to its former grace. Not showroom perfect, but honest. The deep obsidian paint caught the light in waves. Every curve carried the memory of the hands that had brought it back to life. Ethan stood by the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag, his reflection faintly mirrored in the car's surface. Beside him, Rex stretched and yawned, tail flicking in lazy rhythm. Emily leaned against the fender, wearing a denim jacket rolled at the sleeves, her eyes following the slow swirl of dust in the sunbeam. "It's strange," she said softly. "After everything, it feels like the car's breathing again." Ethan nodded. "Maybe it is. Things like this, they remember. Every dent, every patch, every hand that touched them, it all stays." She smiled. "Like people." "Yeah," he said. "Like people." They had spent weeks side by side, long hours tightening bolts, sanding paint, and sharing stories that only came when the work lulled. She told him about the nights at the hospital, holding the hands of dying soldiers who reminded her of her father. He told her about Afghanistan, about the noise and dust, and the day he learned silence could be the loudest thing in the world. Between them, the car became something sacred, a confessional made of steel and memory. That morning, Emily brought 2 mugs of coffee and a set of vintage keys on a worn leather tag. "They were still in the glove box," she said, smiling. "I figured it's only right you take the first drive." Ethan shook his head. "It's yours, Emily. Always was." She hesitated, glancing at the car, then back at him. "Then come with me. Just this once." He considered it, then smiled. "All right." The garage doors rolled open, letting in a rush of bright wind and the sound of birds returning home. Emily climbed behind the wheel, adjusting the seat, her movements cautious but sure. Ethan slid into the passenger seat, Rex jumping into the back, his head resting proudly between them. When she turned the key, the engine caught instantly, humming low and strong. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Emily eased the car onto the old road that wound through the forest. The tires whispered against the asphalt, carrying them through tunnels of pines just beginning to green. The scent of new rain drifted through the cracked window. Sunlight flashed across the dash, the same dash her father once touched. Ethan watched the trees blur past. "He built this car with care," he said. "I think part of him knew someone would need it one day." Emily's hands tightened on the wheel. "I used to think everything he loved died with him. But now, I think love's harder to bury than we think." For miles, they didn't speak. The road climbed, curved, then opened to a ridge overlooking the valley, the same one that framed Ethan's small town. From up there, the horizon shimmered gold. Emily parked and cut the engine. Silence returned. A deep, living quiet that filled the air like a benediction. She turned toward Ethan, her eyes damp but calm. "I used to hate him," she said, "for leaving, for not saying goodbye. But this car, it showed me that maybe goodbye wasn't the end. Maybe he just didn't know how to come back." Ethan met her gaze, then looked out at the valley. "Sometimes men who've been through war forget how to walk toward peace. It's easier to keep moving than to stop and look at what's broken." She nodded slowly. "Did you forget, too?" His lips curved, not in a smile but in acceptance. "For a long time, but fixing this car, meeting you, it reminded me that not everything worth saving is gone." A gust of wind carried through the trees, bending the grass like a soft wave. Emily reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the old photograph, her father holding her as a child beside the BMW. She slipped it into the visor. "He can ride with us," she said quietly. Ethan chuckled. "Back seat's getting crowded." Rex barked softly, tail thumping the seat, and for the first time in years, Ethan laughed. A deep, easy laugh that didn't hurt on the way out. When they drove back down the hill, the light had shifted to a warm amber. The road ahead stretched straight and long, fading into the horizon. As they neared the garage again, Emily slowed the car, her eyes distant. "Ethan," she said, voice trembling just enough to betray the weight of her words, "you didn't just bring me a letter. You gave me my father back. You gave me something to believe in again." He looked at her, then at Rex in the mirror. "You gave it back to yourself. I just turned the wrench." They parked in front of the open garage. The sun dipped low, painting everything in copper and gold. Emily stepped out, brushed a hand along the BMW's roof, then turned to him. "So what now?" Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. "Now? You drive, you live, you keep the engine warm for him." Her eyes softened. "And you?" He looked around the quiet space that had once felt like a tomb and now felt alive again. Walls breathing, air light. "I think I'll keep fixing what's broken," he said. "It's what I'm good at." Emily nodded. She reached out, touched his arm once, a gentle, grateful gesture, then got into the car. The engine started with that same steady hum. As the BMW rolled away down the road, Rex trotted to the door, watching until the car became a glimmer between the trees. Ethan stood beside him, the breeze tugging at his jacket. "She's gonna be fine," he murmured. Rex barked once, low and sure. Ethan smiled. Yeah, us too. He turned back toward the garage. Inside, the last light of day spilled across the workbench, touching the old wrench, the worn rag, and the corner of the empty floor where the BMW had stood. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel the weight of ghosts. Only a quiet gratitude for the ones that finally found their way home. Outside, the road stretched on, a ribbon of silver beneath the fading sky, waiting for whatever stories would come next. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they come quietly. In the hum of an old engine, in the loyalty of a dog who never leaves your side, or in the kindness of a stranger who decides that one story deserves an ending. Ethan thought he was fixing a car, but what he really repaired was a promise, one written in love, sealed by time, and delivered through grace, because when hearts are willing, even steel and sorrow can become instruments of redemption. Perhaps that's how God works, not through spectacle, but through simple acts of care, one hand reaching out to another. And maybe, somewhere in your own life, there's something waiting to be restored. A friendship, a dream, a part of yourself long left in the dark. If this story touched your heart, share it, so someone else might remember that faith and kindness still change lives. Leave a comment below. Tell us what miracle you're still believing for. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Paws and Hearts Tales, because tomorrow we'll journey again into another story where hope takes form. Until then, may God bless you and keep you, and may His quiet miracles find you wherever you are tonight.